Hello, physical science students. Today is our first lesson in Unit 5A, which is all about matter. Today we are looking at Section 1, which is just properties of matter. First couple of lessons will focus on Standard 5A, where we are comparing and contrasting different models that predict the arrangement of particles in solids, liquids, gases, and plasma. So hopefully some of this stuff will seem familiar to you because you did see this in 8th grade physical science. So we are officially in the chemistry content of this course. We are just finished up the baby physics portion. Now we are starting baby chemistry. So what is chemistry? Well, chemistry is the study of what things are made of and how those things change. So simply put, it's the study of matter and its changes. Now, what is matter? Well, matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. So it has to have both, it has to occupy space and have mass. Things that are made up of matter is most anything that you encounter on a daily basis. The air that you breathe, the desk that you touch, the clothes on your back, the food that you eat, those are all matter. They have mass and occupy space. Now, matter is made up of atoms. Now, a couple of things that are examples of not matter would be heat, because heat doesn't have mass. Light, sound, and electricity are also other examples of things that do not classify as matter because they don't have mass. They might fill up a room, but they're not going to have any weight or any mass associated with them, so they are not considered matter. Light, sound, electricity, and I mentioned heat. Now, what does it mean when I say have mass and takes up space? Well, mass is a measurement of the amount of matter in an object. Here in our class, we're either going to use a triple balance beam or an electronic balance, and it gives you the mass as it is affected by gravity. So for our purposes of this course, we're going to kind of ignore the effect of gravity, and we're just going to say that mass is kind of equivalent to how much something weighs. Now, volume is the amount of space that an object takes up. We typically would measure volume with either a ruler, if it was like a box or a cube, or a rectangular prism type thing. Or if it's something that's not cubic, we would use a graduated cylinder and we would do what is called volume displacement. So we'd have a graduated cylinder with some water in it. We'd have that volume and then we'd drop our item in it. The volume of the water would go up and we could subtract those two values to actually determine the volume of the irregular object. So like basketball, bowling balls, I wouldn't be able to put that in a graduated cylinder, but I could use the circumference and the diameter, could use some geometry skills to actually calculate the volume. Now, it's interesting to note that, if I were to compare a basketball and a bowling ball, their volumes are pretty similar. They're about the same size, but their mass is drastically different. That bowling ball is considerably heavier because it has more particles, it has more atoms in it, it has heavier atoms in it as well. Where that bowling ball, Ms. Raines, where the basketball is primarily air, and air has a lot of empty space in it because the particles are really, really spread out. So let's talk a little bit about physical properties of our substances. A physical property is any characteristic of the material that can be measured or observed without changing the substance's composition. These are things that I can measure or observe without changing what the substance is made of. Typically, this is stuff that involves your five senses. It's how it looks, it feels, it sounds, it smells, it moves. Those are all things that I can measure or observe without changing the composition. So I could say that something is blue. I could say that something feels fuzzy or sounds loud or is conductive. Remember, conductive means heat or electricity. I could also look at its density. We've talked about density in a previous lesson. Luster and malleability. What does luster mean? Well, luster is just a nice fancy word for shiny. Most all metals that you will encounter have luster. Malleability, that is the ability to be pounded into sheets. So the fact that we can get a roll of aluminum foil, the fact that aluminum foil can be pounded into a nice flat sheet, is a physical property of that foil. So, talking a little bit about what viscosity is. Viscosity is the tendency of a liquid to keep from flowing. So it is its resistance to flow. The greater the viscosity, the slower the liquid moves. So this far substance could be something like maybe soap or shampoo, liquid soap, sorry. Where this first object is probably going to be something like water or maybe rubbing alcohol. Water has a very low viscosity because it flows really, really fast. Soup, oh Lord mercy, can't talk. Soap, honey, corn syrup are all things that have high viscosity because they do not flow fast. They flow very, very slowly. Another example in the presentation, besides water or rubbing alcohol, they have vinegar. But anything that pours really, really quickly has a low viscosity. Now, it is interesting to note that viscosity will decrease when the object is heated. So if I want my syrup to flow faster or my honey to flow faster, I just heat it up. I put it under some hot running water. It's going to decrease its viscosity and it's going to flow out of the container much easier. Conductivity, this is not a new term for us, so just kind of a revisit. It's the ability of a substance to conduct heat or electricity. Remember that our metals are substances that have a high conductivity. They are really, really good conductors of not only heat, but also electricity. Things that would not be good conductors of heat would be things like wood, or cloth, or rubber. Those, remember, are our insulators. That's why you notice that many of your utensils, not your utensils, but your pots and pans have rubber on the edges or plastic handles so that they don't conduct the heat from the substance. So malleability, I mentioned this very briefly a moment ago, but malleability is the ability of a solid to be hammered into sheets or shapes without shattering. This is how we can make coins and maybe even jewelry by pressing metal into thin layers, and it's not going to crack or shatter. And I say metals because our metals tend to be very, very malleable. An example of something that's not malleable would be like a glass dish. If I try and hammer that glass dish, I'm not going to get a thin shape. I'm going to get a whole bunch of fragments. So that would be an example of something that can shatter. Other substances that can shatter, many of our ionic compounds shatter. Some of our non-metals that tend to be solids, they would shatter if we were to try and hit them with a hammer. So hardness is another physical property. And it's a way that we can compare different materials and possibly use the hardness to identify a substance. Basically, what hardness is the ability of one object to scratch another. So if the object can scratch something else, it is harder than what's doing the scratching. So notice how I've got this little white mark in my image. That means my white crystal is harder or has a higher hardness rating than the brown rock. If it didn't leave a scratch, it would have been less hard. It is interesting to note that the hardest material known to man is diamonds, and diamonds are just made from carbon in a particular arrangement. So diamonds are the hardest substance that we encounter. It can scratch any other substances, so you can use a diamond to etch things into glass and stone. Luster. Luster, as I said, fancy word for shiny. but it basically describes how much a substance reflects the light. So notice how my top images here on the screen have high luster. They have a lot of reflective abilities. Oops, S does not look like a S, but that's okay. Where the bottom objects have low luster, they are not very shiny. They tend to be dull, maybe even considered opaque. Low luster, L-U-S-T-E-R. So our metallic substances are going to have luster, where our non-metallic substances are not going to have luster. So density is another physical property of substances, and density is a ratio of the mass per volume. So density equals mass over volume. It's a measurement of how compact the atoms are in the material. So it gives you an idea of how close the things are. Gas, for example, has very, very low density because the atoms are really, really spread out. But if I were to have like a block of gold, it's going to be pretty heavy because those gold atoms are going to be really, really tightly packed, and that object is going to have a considerable higher density than the other. Now, it is important to note that when we are measuring the mass of an object, mass is typically measured in grams or kilograms. For our course, we tend to use grams because of the type of scales that we use. Volume is going to be measured in either milliliters, liters, or if it's a volume that is determined by a ruler, it's going to be centimeters cubed or meters cubed.